Harriet, welcome.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, Jenelle. Thank you for having me.
I have always wanted to interview someone about the US prison system ever since I started this podcast. It's something that I'm very intrigued about. And I never, ever thought I'd be interviewing a woman about it.
Wow. Okay. I appreciate that.
I just forget that women also work in the prison system.
Oh, yes. Yes, we do.
There's a lot,
We do.
there's a lot of women.
There's a lot of women, and it's more women in a male's prison than it is female to female as far as prison system.
When you told me that the last time, I thought that was so fascinating. Because my first instinct is, why would you ever put a woman in a men's prison system? Like, aren't you worried about her safety? But it
There's,
doesn't seem to be that way.
right. There's always safety issues, but I think from my personal perspective, and for those who are female corrections officer can probably agree, it's easier as a woman to work in a male's because of we as women by nature are very emotional. And female to female, you're dealing with hormones, you're dealing with drama. And not that to say that the males that don't have their drama or anything going on there, but it's just more, I don't know, it's more like a soap opera type thing. We work with, females because we're so hormonal, we're so emotional and everything. So it's a little bit easier for us as women to work with males because males, they're more straightforward. You kind of know what they're about, how they think in a more a concrete way than females.
So what you're saying is men are a little bit more simple.
Yes, exactly. Simple-minded. No, not just kidding. But yeah. And
Me
there
and
are
my girlfriends always joke about that, where we try to overcomplicate things, and like men that we're dating, whatnot, will say things, and then we're trying to figure out what they said. And I'm like, no, what they said is exactly what they mean. Like,
right.
not,
Exactly.
but women, like, there's so many deeper layers of meanings, the drama
Right.
behind it. It's not a stereotypical blanket statement, but like, there's some truth in it.
It is. It is. I mean, it is what it is. That's just, how we're wired.
Why did you get into this line of work at the beginning? How old were you when you got into this line of work?
I was very young because I started off in the police department living in North Carolina. And then I think that was I wanted to be a police officer, but then I had my daughter. I was a single mom at that time. So when I actually got into the correctional side of the system, I was pretty old. I was like in my early 40s.
What were you initially nervous about going into that line of work?
Dealing with the males and how they would, react to me as a female.
Mhm.
And I would be considered an easy target for them physically or mentally, and how to handle any situations that may arise that they may come at me aggressively. That was one of my first, concern.
Do they, like, when you go through training for that kind of stuff, do they train you like physically how to handle yourself?
Oh yeah, yeah. All officers have to go through the corrections training academy, which we have in Ohio. Self-defense, even the how to write a report, cognitive training, and how to diffuse a situation. A lot of times they mostly focus on using our interpersonal skills to kind of diffuse a situation before we have to, because the last thing we want to do is get into a physical conflict. This is then you going through invest and were you doing everything appropriately as
A lot of
protocol?
people.
Yes, a lot of paperwork. Exactly.
But I mean, if you're in a situation, your natural response is going to be fight or flight. So
Right.
how do you overpower that and diffuse it just by using your voice and your interpersonal skills?
You have to kind of put yourself in their position. Look, I understand what you're going through, but this is this and this. And if sometimes of your just the tone of your voice can kind of bring that level of aggressiveness down. And if it doesn't, then I have backup. We have what we call a man down button that we push, and then you've got the yard and other personnel coming in, rushing in.
I think one of the common misconceptions about prison, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a lot of people think the inmates are just in their cells all day long, but it's not like that, is it?
No, absolutely not.
Freely as if you're in like an office building.
Exactly. Well, like what we call lifers, those who are serving a life sentence, that's their home.
Mhm.
And they treat it as their home. So if anybody or any other inmates that are coming in, starting their sentence, kind of infringe upon those who are the veterans, so to speak. I mean, that's cause a disruption because you're disrupting their structured home. But there are exceptions to there's what we call a reception center, and those inmates they do have a restrictive movement because they're just now coming into the state prison system, so they have to get processed, go through medical and everything before they get actually assigned to their what we call their parent institution, their parent where they're going to be
Yeah.
actually serving their sentence.
How is that decided? Just like where there's space?
There is a process we would call it, which I was doing before after left coming out of the uniform as a corrections officer, what we call classification. So we classify them based on their security level of the prison and their criminal history. So if they're violent, high level risk, we have certain prisons within Ohio that only houses what we call high risk offenders and so forth.
I watched Shawshank Redemption again recently. Such a great movie. So that's why I'm like, everything is very top of mind and how like a prison system works.
Hmm.
But from your perspective, what do you think is some of the most commonly misunderstood parts of your job? Like I think people only see the criminal side of it, the public bad media of it, but isn't as bad as the media makes.
Well, they only focus on things that anything that occur that's newsworthy, so to speak. That then they'll focus on that. But on the flip side, Ohio is a rehabilitation type system too, where their focus is on rehabilitating, offering different programming. And a lot of inmates, they receive their college degrees or their GEDs while they're serving their time. They are getting substance abuse counseling, mental health services while they're serving their time. So it's not just all gang banging and all that. I mean, that does happen. Yes. I'm not saying that it's not, but you know, how you spend your time as an inmate determines how you will be when you get out. So, I mean, you have the resources there. It's just, would you want to take advantage of that and do that and be rehabilitated, so to speak, before you get out? Or are you just going to go right back into that cycle to where you were before?
You said once they're serving a life sentence, it's life sentence and they treat it like their home.
Right.
That changed my view on a lot of things when you said that. Because they almost have to make the decision where am I just gonna be miserable or I'm gonna make the best out of this? Like I'm
Right. Exactly.
if someone gets a life sentence, can it go back and become less? Like can they
No.
retrial it?
Oh, only unless, they find new evidence or anything like that. I'm sure a lot of them go through the appeal process and they have access to the law library.
And they're like, let me figure out ways to do my own case.
Right. And a lot of them have successfully, had
Like
their cases overturned because they're usually by a technicality or anything like that. But it has happened. Very rare, but it can happen.
that's fascinating. I mean, it goes back to what people always say. The only person that cares most about this is you.
Exactly.
And you could have the best public defender, best lawyers in the state, but you're one of many cases. They only got probably a half hour to an hour each day to dedicate to this.
Right.
If you have 15 waking hours to dedicate to it, yeah, you can probably appeal your own case.
Exactly. And,
No, you didn't do anything.
right. And they also have what we call jailhouse attorneys, inmates helping other inmates with their cases.
I'm very impressed. And we talked about this the last time. Society often looks at inmates as us versus them. You are a different level of human or less than a human. We are
Mm-hmm.
always above you. And
Hmm.
a lot of people think when someone goes to jail, they had to do it
Hmm.
and serves them right. They should serve the jail sentence. But that's not always the case. It's not as black and white as that, is it?
No, it's not. Certainly not. Especially the younger people that are coming in, unfortunately. Some of them I have spoken with, it just seems like you read their case file, it seems like they were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. And unfortunately, they have to serve their consequences. But there's actually people who's are serving life sentences that they did not commit the crime. But
How do you
because of
know based on their word?
no, not necessarily. You find out in the end once if they're doing appeals, you get the organization like the Innocence Project that will at least bring their case back to court, and the court decides this person was done unjustly and the case was overturned. Or DNA
Yeah.
is definitely a major factor in determining
A lot of
innocent or guilty.
people being taken out of jail because of new evidence with DNA.
Right,
Tons and tons and tons.
exactly.
What does the state, both statewide and federally, do after someone's lost 20 years of their life? There's no amount of compensation in the world that would give you that back.
No, there's no amount of compensation. They said, "Oh, my bad. We're sorry. Good luck with the rest of your life." Like you said, it's just how do you compensate somebody who spent over 40 something years serving a crime that they didn't commit? You
As a
know?
corrections officer, you're dealing with a lot of different personalities.
Hmm.
And I'm sure you're dealing with some of them that you said, yeah, I knew they were innocent. They knew they were innocent. How do you go in there day in, day out and just like playing through the motions with them? How does
Well,
that not take a toll on you?
it does. It
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
I would say it did. After I became a corrections officer, I still worked in the prison, and I would do was a assessment to determine that was part of the process of classifying them to their parent institution. And when I talk with them, when they first come in, I have to get their criminal history, what they've done, their family history, and there's just their criminal way of thinking and whether they're appropriate for this certain facility or not. But, a lot of them, they come in and I don't know if it's just my experience, but I can just pretty much tell that the system had failed them in a lot of ways. And how I deal with it, I kind of take them in. Sometimes a lot of, especially the younger generation, they just need like someone to talk to them like a mom, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because
They've
perhaps
never had anyone care about them.
didn't have anybody that really talked to them that way. I mean, I don't coddle. That's one thing I didn't do. I kind of give them a
'Cause
reality, but
they
I
still
get
are like adult, like boys. Like they're still like
right,
17, 18, 19 years old. Yeah.
right. I just said, look, okay, this happened. You're here. You're at the crossroad. You got to make the decision from here on out to do what you have to do to get out. You got the resources. If you didn't graduate while you were out, now you have an opportunity to gain a skill or whatever and then move on forward. A lot of them would appreciate that, because I mean, it's hard for them to come in, especially if there's first time when they have a first number. They come in, they don't know, they're scared. Either one way, they act tough just to overcompensate their actual insecurity, or they come in just like blind, clueless. Those are the ones that I feel like I can reach.
Do you find there's biases at all when these sentences are being served? Is there any rhyme
No,
or reason to it? Or
not
it's really dependent on
necessarily.
what you did. It doesn't matter how old you are or anything.
Right. I think there's biases in culturally.
Well,
There are definitely biases
don't
on
get me
that.
started.
So inmate A, who is white, had committed the same crime as inmate B, who is non-white, but inmate A has a chance to maybe get probation, whereas inmate B, you get the maximum prison time. And I see it all the time. Once you're in the system, they're going to try their best to keep you in the system. It's up to you how you're going to navigate that. You've got to use your brain and do what you have to do in a way to get out and move forward
And you
because
tell them you got to work twice as hard.
you got to work
Sorry,
twice as
but
hard. Yes.
and that breaks your heart to say that.
Yeah, and it's the truth. But again, they also know that for hearing it from a staff member to say that to them. I think they, okay, well, she's not so bad. She does get how I feel.
Yeah. She gets that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
shit out of luck right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
look at all the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff.
Yeah.
Makes me friggin' sick.
I mean, now I'm just sitting here. It's like an open season now. You don't know.
That's a bad precedent.
It's a bad precedent.
We already had
Exactly.
that precedent of culturally, you get off with a lot more.
Yep.
And we just proved it time and time again.
Yeah. But, again, on the flip side, don't put yourself in that situation in the first place. You know that if you're in a with a group of people that are about to rob somebody or doing something, I mean, why are you putting yourself in that situation to give the police to, arrest you, to give the courts to sentence you to prison? Because you already know you're not going to get off. Unless
You
you,
already have a strike against you.
right. You already have a strike against you. So,
The state prison that you were working in, you said it wasn't high security. So the inmates that were in there, kind of what was the norm of why they were in there?
it was a parent institution. So there were from lifers to those who are like medium security, but it was a parent institution. So that was their home. And so they were more, they walk around freely. They were in programmings. And then, we as staff will always say, well, the inmates are the one that's running the prison. We're just there to,
Keep a little bit of peace that we
right.
can.
We're just making sure they're running it right, I guess. But yeah, so I mean, I've met all kinds, and like I said, the programming is there,
But
and
all types of sentences,
all types of sentences. Yeah,
drugs, murder,
yeah,
everything.
right. You
Yeah,
know,
everything.
hmm
I'm asking this very naively, but it's because I feel like this is what I like see in movies and read in books and stuff. But I've read and I've seen that depending on the type of crime you committed, your own inmates might turn on you because they think that's a worst crime. Did you
Oh
see
yeah,
that?
oh yeah. I mean, that's the number one is if you're a sex offender against a child, that's just
They
a line you
That's a
just don't
line
cross.
where people hate them.
Even yeah, you're a criminal yourself, but criminals don't like criminals who does that.
That's so fascinating.
It's kind of weird in a way, but it's
Well,
like,
like
well,
it gives
even
you
they
hope
have
there's some
standards.
moral ground still there.
Right. Right. Even they have standards. We can kill and we can do drugs, and everything, but you do not mess with kids because I think everybody has children. They may have children, they have nieces, daughters, or whatever. So that's just a line that you don't cross and you will pay for it. A matter of fact,
What is your view on that? Because at the end of the day, you are still human. You still want justice served. You still have your own morals. You agree with these people. But at the end of the day, you still have a job where you still have to keep all these people alive.
right. I was just going to say, sex offenders have their own pod. They kind of keep the sex offenders away out of
They
different.
know everyone else is going to get at them.
Right. So I agree with it, but if something happens, I have to respond as if
It's on your watch. Yeah.
on my watch. Exactly. So
Oh, man. It's like being a defense lawyer. You don't agree with any of it, but you still got to do your job.
right. Exactly. Exactly. But then at the same time, when you're talking to someone who was convicted of raping a 5-year-old or infant, you can't help but to in your
How
mind
do you,
think, oh,
how do you ever treat them with respect?
yeah, yeah, how can you? I don't even. I've had one particular inmate try to justify what happened. That
Elaborate if you want.
I think it was his stepdaughter or the woman that he was dating, her daughter or something. I think and this child was like maybe 2 years old, and
That's hard to hear.
yeah, and he was justifying it by saying he was drunk or something. It was just something that was so asinine to where I just had to cut it off. Right now, I don't want to hear. I just sometimes I have to just be blunt.
Yeah.
Look, I don't even want to hear that. I just
It's a different level
interview
of
him.
criminal.
Right. Yeah. That. Yeah. Sit back and think about it. How do you have an excuse for it? Whatever.
This job is very emotionally labor intensive. How do you leave work and go have a regular life? How do you
That
leave it
is
at the door? I mean, I work in real estate and I have a hard enough time leaving that at the door. This is like a very exciting job. I would get
Sometimes,
so sucked in if I was doing a job like you.
well, and I kind of pick and choose what I talk about. Thankfully, I have a husband that is supportive, but I generally the ones that's everyday humdrum that doesn't bother me. I leave it there, but something like that, I will have to. I have to talk about it just to kind of get it off my chest and process it.
Mhm.
But therapy. Sometimes you need therapy just
And a
to
hell of a lot of it, yeah.
right.
Oh my god. What are some triumphs that you've had in this job? Like some successes? Maybe an inmate that did rehabilitate and you saw them again in the real world and they were doing fantastic. Like, is there any wins?
Yeah, there's a few wins, and we take them when we
Yeah,
can
like you
get them.
celebrate them.
Right. There's a program that we called IPP, which was intensive prison programming, and what it is was you qualify for that. You're able to do your rest of your sentence while you're actually in school or you're learning a trade or whatever, getting the actual resource that you need. There's a few that were qualified, especially the young, they have no violent history or anything like that. So they're able to serve the rest of their time at a facility that's more low level and they're more focusing on getting their GED, learning a trade, going through substance abuse, and they actually get out and be able to utilize what they have learned while they were in the system and they've actually found jobs. I'm a parole officer now. Ohio has partners, a lot of the companies that partner with our system to give offenders a chance to be employed because that's one of the main issues where when they get out, no one would hire them because of their felony record. So we have what we call the reentry program, and there are a lot of inmates and offenders that have taken advantage of it and actually have done really, really well. And to the point that they're promoting within the company that they're, working. So that makes me feel okay.
Um, we all make mistakes. Like,
Right.
obviously, some a lot bigger than others, and obviously some with a lot bigger consequences. But I don't know. I think it's very naive to look at the world as good versus bad.
Hmm.
It's very binary.
Right.
I mean, I've probably have done 3 bad things already today. Not enough to get me incarcerated, but does that make me any better of a person? I don't know.
Right. Exactly.
Like a
Exactly.
law, there's been a law written that says what you did was a little worse than what I did, but there's a lot of people. Well, you look at white collar crime. There's a lot
Hmm.
of shit happening all day, every day.
Oh, exactly.
And
Exactly.
like, what's
It-
worse? I don't know. Like, depends on your morals, I guess.
right.
Depends on what hits home more for you.
Right. Right. Absolutely. For those inmates or offenders who didn't have a home, I mean, the odds are already against in the anyway. But, not to say that it all happened because, there are inmates or offenders that beat the odds, even though they grew up in a shitty household. But
Yeah.
again, if you give them a leg up just a little bit, they can probably take it and move on forward from that.
In your 5 years as a corrections officer, what were you surprised to learn about yourself and maybe some growth that you went through?
I was pretty surprised that I was able to relate with them, that I was able to gain their respect,
Mm,
especially as a female. So that was, I mean, I learned that I can relate to all the different types of people, even the ones that I didn't think I could be able to relate to or talk to, especially those who are white supremacists because they were in there too, but I didn't have problems with them. They gave me respect. I've never had any issues talking to them.
so that's interesting to me. Normally, a white supremacist wouldn't have any respect for you. So, do you think being a woman trumps the skin color?
It could have been,
Because a lot of
or
white
or they could have
supremacists,
knew what would happen if they would have disrespected me. I don't know, but when I see a swastika or whatever, I said, "Well, what is that on your hand?" And he said, "Oh, they kind of dummy it down. They don't say, well, yeah, I don't, you know what it's."
do you think they have shame?
There's been a few that I think felt kinda uneasy and didn't feel comfortable when I asked them that. So that shows that
They're only as good as the group they're with. They
Exactly.
don't actually have those views.
Right. And that's true because a lot of them come out, they only attach themselves just for security
Yeah,
purposes. But
community.
once they get out, they're not even nearly as how they were.
They're not as tough as they thought they were.
No.
Well, the prison that you worked in, is it like 50-50, black and white?
50-50, black and white. I mean, there's black, white, Hispanic,
Panic?
I mean, it's all culturally
Yeah.
diverse. You want to call it that. Yes.
So, I mean, coming in and being a white supremacist, being thrown into this prison, have fun.
Right. But,
Like,
well, they gravitate, there's Aryan Brotherhood, and then you've got the Crips.
so
Yeah.
it's funny they still stick into their groups even within.
Unless they stick to their own groups, but then there's maybe a time where both of these, they'll bond together to go against another group that they don't. I mean, it's crazy. It really.
To add to that, what has surprised you about just human psychology? Like sitting back and watching all this.
It is really,
Entertaining,
it's
probably.
very entertaining, but it's very like, I feel like you're in a twilight zone. You're like actually in a
Do you think
twilight zone.
sometimes they forget they're in prison? Like they're just in their own world.
Right, right. Truth be told, it's probably they don't mind being in prison because it is structured. They
We
have
talked
no
about
structure
this.
on the
Yeah.
outside. So you come in, you're being told when to eat, when to go to sleep. They need that structure, I guess.
And depending on kind of why they went into prison, who they were hanging out with before, they probably feel safer in prison
Right.
from
Exactly.
staying alive perspective.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I mean, to feel like, okay, well, I think when they call it, I'm going to go lay it down. That
Well,
means they're going to go into prison and kind of chill out for a little bit.
I don't even know how to respond to that.
Yeah, it's something to really study if you want to be if you really want to be a psychoanalyst. That's
I mean, that's the place to do it, right?
right.
If the prison that you were working in is a rehabilitation prison, and these people, the moment you let them out, they're gonna reconvict or like do something else because
Hmm.
they feel safer in. It's like there's a lot of taxpayer dollars being thrown out the window,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
There's a deeper issue here, like systemic issue.
Right. Exactly.
And I think
And
you made a good point where yes, they can do the programs and whatnot, but once they get into the real world, if they can't get a job, like what's the point of being out here?
right.
I had more responsibility, more friends, more purpose in prison. And this is
Exactly.
very like flippant of me to say, but that's kind of how I'm seeing it.
Yeah, and you're definitely correct. You're definitely correct, which is why I'm glad that the state does recognize that and trying to coordinate with companies out here that look, not all inmates are bad offenders. They just need a break. And so a lot of these companies now are, at least opening the opportunity for them to get a job. Now, once you get that, that's on you to do what you're supposed to do.
We're
Like,
not
you
helping you
can't say,
afterwards. Yeah.
right. You can't say that you didn't have an opportunity. Amazon is very big here
Yeah.
as far as hiring offenders. Cause I know a lot of my offenders that are on my case. So they are working at Amazon. So
Does that make you have more respect for Amazon as a company?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Because Amazon gets a lot of backlash in a lot
Yeah,
of areas.
they do. But, again, in that aspect, I do give them credit for that.
Mhm. The people that are advocating for companies to take on former inmates, what's the sell? Like, how do you convince a company to be open to this? Because the reasons why they're saying no are very obvious.
Right.
But what's the reasoning behind, yeah, like hire them?
Well, to be honest, a lot of it could be money incentive. The state may pay
Fair.
companies so much, or you might
I mean,
actually,
that's an incentive. It's still an incentive. Yeah.
right. Or you may actually have a small company whose, CEO or whatever had been in that particular inmate's
Yeah.
shoes.
Mhm.
So they understand what the inmates or offenders are going through. So they want to pay it forward, you know what I mean, by giving
Yeah.
back.
Nice. I like that. Any significant challenges while being a corrections officer? I know you alluded to at the beginning that something happened that you're like, I got to get out of here? You were in that role for 5 years. So I don't know if you want to open up about it, but what made you want to transition out?
Well, I'll put it this way.
Mm.
Sometimes it's best when you feel like you feel more secure, it's more that you will have a backup if something happens to where you're in a situation to where your life is threatened and you feel like the inmates will have your back more than staff. Then I think that's the time to where, okay,
Whose side am I on anymore?
yeah,
Why is that? Because they don't want to put their own life in harm?
personality conflict. I
Yeah.
can only speak personally. I think a personality conflict, everybody's disgruntled, but like we were trained at the end of the day, we all want to go home to our families and stuff. So
Of
I don't
course.
care if I don't like you as a person or anything like that. You're still a coworker. I still respect you enough
Yeah.
that I know you have a family just like I do.
I've never been in a situation as tough as that, but yeah, like working with someone, you don't feel like they have your back. You're like, what the hell is the point of being here?
Right. Right.
So you mentioned that one of the things you're struggling with is the career transition. So is it
hmm
this transition from the job you're as a corrections officer into a parole officer?
Well, yeah. Even now as a parole officer, there's challenges, and I think more and more is put on parole officers because we're out here in the field now. Now we're wide open. It's not in a enclosed space like
You
prison.
feel safer in the prison system
Sometimes
as
I do.
well.
You're right,
Yeah.
right. Because of the COVID, we're very careful. We cannot go into the offender's house
Mhm.
anymore, which that's fine. But there are a lot of incidents that are people that are, very, I don't know, their mind is just pretty much snapped. I don't know if it's because of the pandemic
I was gonna say a lot of us. Nothing
to
about
where,
being a former inmate. I think we're all going a little nuts.
right. And we're kind of wide open. We're not law enforcement officers, but we are armed. And there's a lot of challenges out here to where we meet former inmates that may had a bad experience with a particular officer. They're being confronted. Just recently, we
At a
just received
grocery store or anything,
right.
they can come up to you whenever. That's really scary.
Just recently, there's an incident that happened in Columbus. A lot of parole officers are in conjunction with the U.S. Marshals and everything. They have formed their own task force, so they're all working together collectively. Each agency are coming together to work collectively. Well, in this particular incident, an offender was shot 5 shots at 2 U.S. Marshals. None of the parole officers that were there were injured. But, you go into a house trying to do an arrest or even trying to do a search, the offenders, they may have a weapon and they start firing back. And it could have been it is an all bad situation because 2 U.S. Marshals were wounded. But those are the situations that we have to deal with. And I have offenders that if I feel that needs to be arrested, I call them, I call the task force.
Yeah, my God, you're not gonna go do anything. No, 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 no.
Right,
Because your
right.
job as a parole officer is to make sure they're serving their parole.
Right.
Like
That they're
if
doing
yeah.
that they're supervised, they're doing their conditions that was set forth by the parole board.
What does that look like day to day? So say if you have like how many cases do you cover at one time? 20, 30? That's probably really cute of me, hey?
Well, yeah, that we would love that. If I had 20 or 30 cases,
Should I do I add another
I would be
zero
in
to that?
heaven. No, we're averaging like over 100
Oh.
supervision
But that doesn't make any
offenders.
damn sense. So say you what do you have to do? You meet with them once a week, once a month? Like,
No, our partner and I, we have high offenders that we have to see every month, or offenders that we see every 2 to 3 months, or the low offenders, we don't really have to see them face to face. We can talk to them over the phone to make sure
okay.
that they're doing in compliance. But I mean, this is, you've got 100 people that you have to see or make contact with in a few months. And then on top of that, if you have a violator who has committed another crime while on supervision, now you got to go to a hearing. And that means gathering the evidence and recommending them to go back to prison. So that takes a lot of time.
Mhm.
So it is. It's a very hard, very stressful type of
What are
career.
the hours like?
Well, we don't get paid overtime unless we have to request it, but we get what we call flex time, compensation
Okay.
time. So I work 8 hours, but if I have to go over, I have to flex it out by taking off early or going in
But
early.
is it like a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday
Hmm.
on a good week?
With holidays, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. But
And in contrary, being a corrections officer, those were longer days.
those were longer days.
And would you be in the prison for like multiple straight days, then go home? Or do you go
Well,
home
let
after
me
the end of the day?
well let me tell you how this worked, which was another reason why I got burned out. If you work a certain shift in your 8 hour shift, and the next shift that comes on, if someone calls off and they don't have enough coverage on that shift, then you're considered froze, which means they pull the lowest person on the roster. They will have to stay over and work that second shift. So that's 16 hours. And I've done that plenty. My regular hours was from 3 to 11. So imagine working 3 to 11, 3 afternoon to 11 at night, but then you're being told that you can't leave because they need you for third shift. So I'm working from 11 to 7, and then have to go back to my regular shift the following day. So yeah, that got old real quick.
Real quick. That would get old in one weekend for me. Seriously. Do you miss anything about being a corrections officer?
I kind of miss being able to really have an understanding and talk to a lot of the inmates. I like the inmates were very helpful. Some of them I really got to know and kind of understood their personalities and everything. Here as a parole officer, as long as they're doing the right thing and being in compliance of their supervision, then they're good to work with. But those who are like domestic violence, I mean, we're dealing with that. We're like not only parole officers, we're also social workers, we're also psychologists, we're also
Therapist?
yeah, everything. And we can't be all of that,
And you're paid nothing.
and get paid nothing and try to do an effective job.
So why does
As
anyone do it? There obviously still has to be a part of you that wants to make an impact into the world.
you think you want to make an impact. Yeah.
You
You
start
you
that
try
way.
yeah, you strive to make that impact. And I don't know, a lot of people are coming in thinking that it's all glamorous, especially the younger ones. We have new officers that comes in, especially younger, who think, oh, busting in the door like you see on TV and all of that.
On a
That
power trip almost?
on a power trip, exactly.
Oh, sit
And
back. You're
that's,
not gonna get no respect that way.
no, and exactly. And that's exactly how the offenders, they do not
They
like,
laugh.
people like that. Right.
Like you're on our
Right.
turf now. Seriously.
Exactly.
Oh my
Exactly.
god. I'm sure there's sometimes you wanted to hit record and put it and like watch the movie and direct it.
With my popcorn and soda, yeah.
Seriously. What is wrong in your eyes in the US prison system? And what would you fix if you could?
For staff, I think you need better realistic training because we're dealing with different facets and different cultural diversity. And understand that, okay, we do have authority, but we also have authority to change someone's mind if we approach it in a different way. That's one of the things is better training. And not all private prisons are effective either. That's a whole nother
A
that's a whole nother
lot
thing.
of bureaucracy
Yeah.
and a lot of people who have very different agendas,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
conflicting agendas, I'm sure.
Right.
A
So that
lot of different measurements of achievement here.
exactly.
Ugh.
So that's one of the main things I would change.
What about systemically? I mean, look at the last couple of years we've been in. Like, the states is bad for systemic issues. So, just talk to your states. What in Ohio needs to change systemically to stop this influx of inmates?
the systemic attitudes of the powers that be themselves. I think,
And
you
this is
know,
like your counties. This is
the
like
counties, the
political charge. Yeah.
political, you're right, right. You have to understand that this is not working. Sometimes, I mean, the revolving door, I mean, although it's, you do have some successes, but I think they're more focusing on the numbers rather than working on the actual problem. And I think everything you can't measure by, well, this percentage, well, we're doing really great because this one inmate graduated, got his GED. Whereas everybody
And they're
else,
going to run with that one person. Be
right.
like, love, we're
Exactly.
doing
See,
great.
it's working. So it's to change the system is to change the mindset of the powers that be.
I mentioned Kyle Rittenhouse. And the question I was going to ask, do you think this is going to change for the better based on new generations?
Hell no.
So
I,
it
I
like the new generations, it's not getting better based on that.
no. I really believe it's going to get worse.
Why? That's interesting. You think there's more
Again,
hate?
in the last few years, if you could see the pattern, it's getting worse. It's like, I don't know if the history is like repeating itself. It's going like backwards. I don't know. People are it's just open up. I mean, I guess they've always been that way, but at least back then it was more settled. Now situations like Rittenhouse and all these other extremists, it's like an open season. I mean, they're openly, blatantly expressing their hatred towards others. And really, there's no consequences because they can go to court and get off saying claiming self-defense, or they felt fear for their life or whatever, even though they were the actual perpetrator. But they felt in their mind that they were justified in doing what they did, and the courts believe it. So, I mean,
Someone has
yeah,
an expensive lawyer.
right. So, I mean, to me, it's an open season, and so there's going to be other Rittenhouse
Yeah.
cases coming on. I really believe that.
But we're not born with hate. Hate is learned. Where
Exactly.
where the hell are they learning it?
Like I said, I look at example of children.
Mm,
Children, they only emulate what's in their household because kids see other kids. They don't look at color
they don't.
primarily. They don't look at color. They just see, another little person that looks like them.
You're
But
the same height as me and you play
we're
in the
the same
playground. Let's
height,
play.
let's play. But then after a time when they're actually starting to listen to their parents or whatever, start watching TV and all this other stuff, social media,
Mm,
then the ideas will start getting into their head that, oh, these type of person, you got to stay away from these type of person because they're this or that or whatever.
mm.
But like
So
you said, it's a learned behavior.
it sounds like it all starts at home and how you're
It starts
raising
at
your own
home.
kids.
Right.
And then that's the biggest change that you can make is how you raise the people in your own house
Right.
and how you influence them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. Okay, last topic that I want to talk to you about. You mentioned that you're a human trafficking advocate always, but also why and how?
Well, I think it stems from when I was a domestic violence advocate. I've always
Mm,
been a champion of women and young women at that. And it was back in 2007 when I actually learned the term human trafficking. It didn't really believe that it really existed here in Ohio. But
mhm,
then after I started learning and researching and becoming involved in different organizations who were into the rescuing victims of human trafficking, that I realized, I mean, Ohio is the prime place to traffic victims
why? Because of the
because of
border?
the interstates. We have
Yeah.
a lot of interstates that can go in and out between Michigan to West
Mm,
Virginia. And I've seen girls who went missing that are, we believe that are being trafficked.
of
And
course
it's
they are.
happening every day.
Yes. 100%. I live in Toronto. It's happening all around us. Being a woman, we are much more intuitive. If you meet
Mhm.
someone, you can sense it right away.
Absolutely.
I was at a bar here in Toronto, close to my house, my old place. I'm just out with friends and stuff. And I suspect that I was talking to a girl that was being human trafficked. And I tried to help. Mind you, I don't
Mhm.
have the right training to try to help, but based on how I tried to help her, it solidified my suspicion 100%. And that man took her out of there really quickly. And I worry I made it worse, but yeah, I 100% feel that that's what was happening. But it just goes to show that it's happening right in front of our face. Like human
Exactly.
trafficking isn't happening behind closed doors.
It's
They're
not.
in the same bars as we're in.
Exactly. And the misconception, "Oh, it's happening over in India and China and
No,
all that stuff." No,
it's
it's happening
Toronto,
right here.
it's Ohio,
Yep,
it's
everywhere. And you'd be surprised of who is involved in, the trafficking. I
it's the
mean,
people that you work with.
exactly,
It'll
exactly,
sicken you.
exactly.
The media doesn't get a hold of it too much. Why do you think that? The reason I say that is because when I bring this up to like my friends and stuff, they have the same misconception where like, Janelle, like trafficking isn't happening to 18-year-old girls here in Toronto. And I'm like, yeah, it is.
I think the media don't want to
It's too
expose
icky
it.
for them. You
Right,
think?
because they will have to expose people that you never thought. They will have to expose judges. They will
Mm-hmm.
have to expose attorneys,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Doctors,
doctors,
teachers,
teachers. Exactly. So
CEOs of big companies.
CEO, exactly.
But
So,
why the hell don't we want to expose that?
well,
There's a lot of
that's,
money and power and corruption.
I was going to say that's taking away the money.
And do you think people who Well, you think like journalists and media, do you think they're afraid to get too close, worried for their own safety?
Some, but then there's some that actually have a passion for it and will do what they can to expose because it's all about saving the lives of these victims.
How does everyday people do anything about it? Like, yes, when we say advocacy, being an advocate is doing what? Talking about it, making people aware of it. But what else? Are we out there like saving these lives ourselves? Like, what can we do?
I
We
think,
donate to causes? Like, what do we do?
well, that's what I'm going to say. I mean, their grassroots are now starting because it's such, a big topic, a big thing that's going on. You can't help but to not ignore it. You know what I mean? I know Ohio, they have Ohio Domestic Violence Network, but I
Mhm.
know they also have human trafficking organization too, where you have videos and all kinds of resources and information.
Mm,
And especially there's different organizations throughout the state that actually are very active in
yeah.
human trafficking rescue. So
Okay, good.
I would suggest
Just look
start
for
from
it.
within your own state or province. And
Yeah.
and if not, hell, just form one. I
Preach.
mean, you have to start somewhere. If you know that there's
Mhm.
something to form at, because you might be that person that people will start, okay, oh, I'm glad I'm not thinking this by myself.
Mm,
Because once you start, you never know. People might be thinking it all the way along, but they didn't know how to do anything about it.
mm.
So
Yeah, last couple questions for you. You've talked a lot about, I think some of the main themes we've talked about today are going into a job that isn't as traditional of a path and going into a job where you don't feel like you're qualified or should be there or is going to survive there, but still going for it. We also talked a lot about just seeing humans as humans,
mhm.
like it's not good versus bad. It's you made one mistake, you can change. Like, just believing that humans can change, which I feel a lot of people don't agree with.
Right.
But in saying all of that, like everything we've talked about, any advice for our audience? Just general advice and just like the types of experiences you have had, like dealing with humans all the time.
I think the main advice I would have to people is to be yourself. Whatever you do, whatever profession that you are, if you're dealing with different personalities or different aspects of different people, just be yourself because people know fake when they see it. And so I think they will appreciate you more when you come in your authentic place. When I went in as an officer, I had to go in as tough. I'm tough, but I'm also inquisitive. I like to ask questions. I like to learn from other people because I like learning about different cultures and everything. So, and once people realize that, then they start opening and start talking and probably give me more information than I really should know. But,
It's
I
fun though.
appreciate that. So just be yourselves.
Mm. What's next for you? I know that like you run 3 podcasts, you are an online coach. Like, what's going on? Like, what's like tell people about what you do outside of everything we've talked about. And then also plug where people can find you. Because you run a
Okay.
podcast about like music, right?
I do.
Yeah.
Uh, I talk about different genres of music, the history of whoever started the pioneers of that particular genre, which is that's my fun podcast because I
Fun.
like talking about music. 'Cause I'm a musician by trade,
What instruments?
keyboard, piano, keyboard. So I
Really?
used to play. Yeah, I used to play in a band,
Oh my God, there's so many levels and facets too. I love that.
but I like talking about music. So that's my
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, online coaching. I coach those who are goal setting because as an introvert, I am an introvert by nature, and I it's hard to step out of that comfort zone. But you can achieve so much even as an introvert. So I try to help people who wants to make that decision to make a nice next move, either career, business, relationships, or whatever, and just don't feel like, oh, I'm afraid to step out of that comfort zone. So I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt for it. So I would like to help people go to that next step.
Mhm.
So
So that leads me to ask you. You've given us a lot today. You've given us a lot of stories and insights and into a world that we don't know anything about, like at all. If you were to ask the audience for anything today for you, what is it?
Well, first, I guess, get me on the More Wine and Music podcast. Those who are music buffs, let's have some fun. Join me on the More Wine and Music podcast.
So I want to thank you for your just vulnerability and also just your willing to share all these stories and answers with like no hesitation.
Oh,
Um,
my pleasure.
and for anyone who wants to connect with you further, I will add all of your links into the show notes and hopefully they'll check out your podcast.
Well, I thank you so much, Janelle.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.